And welcome to this edition of the Native News Update on this Thursday, December 1st. I'm your host for today's program, and we go to one of our regular correspondents. That's Mark Trahant on the Shoshone Bannock Reservation of Fort Hall, Idaho, and we catch up on what's happening at the White House on Friday, December 2nd, and a few other political issues. Welcome to the Native News Update, Mark. We want to send our appreciation for you joining with us today, and let's talk a little bit some of the current affairs. Friday, December 2nd, White House Summit. What do you hear is going to go on there, and who's all going to be there, and who won't be there?
Well, this is the third one. They've been meeting all week, starting with a strategy session at the National Congress of American Indians on Tuesday. And then the White House has been holding regional meetings throughout the week where the Great Lakes, for example, the Plains states, the West, will meet separately on issues that are local. Each tribe was invited to send a representative. I haven't got a number yet on how many will be there. I should tell your viewers it's really terrific technology in that anybody can watch it. It'll be on at whitehouse.gov. Live streamed on Friday. Mostly the president. What they do is the president speaks, may take a few questions, may not. Then it becomes much smaller sessions where they drill down on particular issues ranging from IRS regulations to Indian Health Service budget.
Isn't it a matter of really getting to know each other so a tribal chairman or his representative could pick up that phone and call someone and resolve something long before it gets to be a really huge issue or problem?
I think that's a big part of it. And I think just the demonstration, this is the first president in the history of the United States who has done this on a regular basis. And I think that still matters. It's still a great signal to send.
There's still some complaining from time to time that even lumping tribes together in regions doesn't get to their perhaps unique treaties, in some cases unique pieces of legislation, but is fundamentally breaking it down by regions, trying to not treat everyone like everyone's in one ball game together.
Right. And that really is the practical limitations on consultation. Is how do you consult as a federal government with 500 plus entities, some of which are very large, like the Navajo Nation that have a full apparatus, and on some there are villages like St. Michael, Alaska, that may have several hundred people in their membership. So that's a really difficult balancing act. If on every issue, for example, you have full consultation, not every tribe can afford to participate. It's beyond the scope. And indeed, this meeting is already beyond the scope of some tribes.
It's interesting because there's going to be some tribes missing because they can't afford to be there. Do we know of any tribes that aren't going there because they're simply fed up with whatever relationship they have with the Obama administration?
I haven't heard of any directly. I'm sure there are. I've heard from people outside of tribal government who one column recently said that it's BIA puppet governments meeting in Washington.
Well, there's people that feel that way. They feel like, again, there's people that continuously invoke treaty clauses that say that the meetings are supposed to be at a very high level without the Department of Interior and BIA, and there may be something to that in the treaties.
Right.
But what does that mean? What does it mean when you say fundamentally the types of governments have changed over the years where presidents and chiefs don't typically meet one-on-one?
Right. And I will say this, that most tribal governments, if you look at the election patterns, generally have a higher turnout percentage of people participating than in the corresponding non-Indian populations. So it's hard to argue that tribal governments aren't at least mechanically democratic.
Right. And trying to, I think, integrate themselves into the political system in a way that doesn't necessarily bring them into the Republican or Democratic fold. For example, the Wisconsin recall, in which tribal governments are officially pretty much staying neutral to this.
I wanted to mention that, to me, the one both complaint about Obama and real shortfall in this conference has nothing to do with Obama. and that's the disaster that is the Congress. And it's just beyond the scope of what the president can do, and yet there's this sense in Indian country that he hasn't done anything. And what I would like to see in that regard is just some serious planning about the budget.
Right. You're talking about how to make do with not more and not the same amount, but a lot less if everything I'm reading comes to bear fruit.
Right. And I'll give you an example. Some tribal leaders were proposing a hold harmless, and that's a great idea, but it's too late. The train has left the station. Sequestration is now the law of the land, and it would take an act of Congress to overturn that, and the president said he would veto that. Indeed. So that's kind of just out there. Why not try to plan on what we're going to do rather than something that's just not in the cards?
Indeed. You said Obama was going to address the tribal chairman at the White House meeting and take a few questions. Are those questions tend to be choreographed, or are they going to be at large?
The first year he took them, they were somewhat choreographed in that they pre-selected the people. But we'll see. I don't know whether he will or not, to tell you the truth. Last year he didn't. At least that was my recollection. He was just gone.
If he was asked about sovereignty?
He would do better than George Bush.
I would imagine so.
Mr. President, you've been a governor and a president, so you have a unique experience looking at it from two directions. What do you think tribal sovereignty means in the 21st century, and how do we resolve conflicts between tribes and the federal and state governments?
Yeah. Tribal sovereignty means that it's sovereign. You've been given sovereignty, and you're viewed as a sovereign entity.
Okay.
And therefore, the relationship between the federal government and tribes is one between sovereign entities.
What else do you see happening in Washington, D.C.? These consultations with sub-departments and sub-regions, where do you get traction with these meetings that are going on? Where do you see it in policy or in legislation?
Well, there's a lot of focus on fixes to systems that have been kind of like the land into trust situation that have been on the board for some time, and that remains a priority. And it's just one of those things where you're going to have to keep knocking on Congress's door until they finally open it. In terms of policy for budget, there's some talk about it, but there's not really what I would consider a deep sense of planning. We have now a year to go. January 2013 is when these kick in. So to me, that's a great opportunity to take advantage of a year and start to figure out what we're going to do. You start looking at layoffs of the federal workforce, which are going to be required under sequestration. And it's going to impact Indian country very, very hard.
That'll be interesting to see what happens. The recall in Wisconsin is doing very well. 300,000 signatures in the first 12 days of a 60-day period. Strong support from the tribal community. Like I said, tribal government kind of sitting it out. Everybody watching the Republican race. Do you have any kind words of advice to Mr. Kane?
Not Mr. Kane, but he's kind of become more of a
distraction
than an actual implication for the presidency.
Yeah,
it's really down to a couple in that regard.
Romney and Gingrich.
Right.
And Gingrich has taken a leap with the conservatives, supposedly, with Herman Cain going down, which is kind of interesting that they're migrating by Romney and headed over in that direction. Is Gingrich going to be a viable candidate in this election, do you believe?
It's possible. It's still possible he might not be. One of the problems he has is just clear organization. In Iowa, for example, which is only some 30 days away, you have to have a lot of people on the ground to organize things. And I still would not be surprised at all if either Michelle Bachmann or Rick Santorum or Ron Paul won Iowa, because they have that kind of people on the ground that's so required in that state.
Right. Have we ever heard anything out of Newt Gingrich about Indian policy or treaties or anything?
Actually, we have. He has a track record. When he was Speaker of the House, and this is recollection, so I could have this totally wrong, but my recollection is that he worked really hard on the diabetes initiative, the Special Diabetes Initiative Program for Indians, which has become an important part of the funding cornerstone for IHS.
So we could be surprised that he may know some people and reach out to them and put some policy stuff that makes sense to it before we count him out or count him in.
Right. But the policy of contraction will be something he'll be part of no matter what. So it's certainly not someone that's going to be a great friend.
Indeed, has been part of the contraction over the last 20 years, if you're looking at how government, or at least the government they would like.
Right. Since we're talking politics, there's kind of an interesting developing with the Obama reelection. And I think it actually has very interesting implications for Indian country. And that is the thing that Obama did 4 years ago that was sheer genius for a Democrat was to make it a 50-state campaign and to open up offices in places like Idaho and really force the Republicans into being at least on the defensive in places they never needed to think about before. This time around, on the other hand, Obama is going with a strategy to get to 270 electoral votes. And so for Indian country, what that means is that instead of trying to get all of Indian country to vote, it may be much more important to get people voting in Wisconsin, Nevada, states that will really come down to a few thousand votes.
Right. He ended up with something like 330 or something like that, if I remember right. 270 is the threshold, and they're actually saying that's some extra electoral votes that we don't necessarily need. Let's focus on particular states. It's interesting because Wisconsin is very heavily organized into this recall, and if I understand the trajectory, it's going to be from now until the election that there's this organizing going to be on. And we got 72 states, 72 counties in every state on the ground doing this on the Democratic Party side of things. Of course, you've got the Republicans working it very hard from the other end, but it'll be interesting to see what the final numbers are when the re-election might take place, because with challenges and so forth, that we may end up electing a governor in conjunction with the presidential election or very close to it.
Right. And all that organizing will pay off because they'll know where people are and how to mobilize them.
Yeah, there's some anger at what's going on here, and it's not only on the Democratic side, it's on the Republican side. I think some people in the middle and moderates felt that the Walker administration, affiliated with the Tea Party, reached too far this time around. There may be paybacks due, like in Ohio and other places. So Idaho's going to do what?
My vote doesn't count.
All right. Talk to you again, Mark. Thanks for joining with us today.
We'll see you, Paul.
And we're going to go for any updates to
marktrahant.com.
Good to see you again.
Or on Twitter, I'll be doing live tweets from the White, or I won't be there this year, but I'll be watching, and I'll be doing live tweets throughout the event.
And the hashtag on those for people to find it might be?
Hashtag Tribal Nations.
Tribal Nations. We'll look for that, Mark. Thanks a lot.
Okay.
And that is another roundup of news from Indian Country. On this edition of the Native News Update, take some time to look at one of our featured programs called A Conversation with Delbert Wheeler, that's now loaded into IndianCountryTV.com. And thanks for joining with us, and come back again soon.